Well, welcome back to our tour through the museum. Now, Diane, when we were sort of I can see you through the dinosaur there. When we were discussing this, we thought, well, the problem is there's so many big fossils and big things that we've kind of left lying around the museum, and we're getting set up. And you know, even though they fit into living fossils or rapid burial and stuff like that, or dinosaurs, we thought because we've got so many of the larger things, we ought to do a separate episode just for them.
That's right, on big things.
Big things and big fossils and spectacular evidence and all that. Starting with this rather beautiful and spectacular T-Rex head called Jemima. And Jemima is actually based off of the largest T-Rex skull ever found, who was called Sue. And it's a pretty spectacular beast, isn't she?
Yeah, it certainly is.
Rather wonderful, and it gives you a real sense of the size. And so we're actually in the part of the museum which, when people first come in, this is one of the first things that they'll actually get to see. So it's a great photo opportunity. Take a selfie with a T-Rex. But Diane, I wanted to speak about these teeth here, because we're doing an entire separate episode just on dinosaurs. But I mean, a lot of people look at teeth like this, spot teeth like this, and one of the automatic assumptions is, well, it must be a carnivore. But of course, you've come from a biology background. Do big sharp teeth, backward pointing serrated teeth like this always mean carnivore?
No, big teeth just tell you what an animal, it doesn't tell you what an animal eats, it tells you how it eats. So it tells you how big the animal might be, because it's dead, so we don't have any real ones, but it's not going to tell you what it actually eats, because in order to know that, you have to actually see it eat something.
Exactly. And the thing what we need to remind people is when it comes to dinosaurs, as well as many other things, we only know about them from their bones, don't we? So the fossil record is a record of death, not a record of life. One thing you know for sure is that these creatures are dead, so you can work out a lot about how they died. You can work a lot about how they drowned and so on and so forth. You can even look at the preservation and even break down inside and see what's inside. But ultimately, you're looking at a record of death, not a record of life. So you've got to be very careful when you start interpreting things like, well, it has great big sharp teeth, therefore it must have been a meat eater. But of course, Diane, we know if you take Genesis as literal history, and it says in Genesis chapter 1 verse 30 something very specific about what dinosaurs ate. What does it tell us?
Well, it tells us that all creatures that lived on the land, lived on the sea, they all ate plants. They were given all the green plants to eat. So just because something has big teeth like this does not make it a ferocious killer, because in fact nothing died in the very good world.
Exactly. So in the beginning everything was very good. All creatures were vegetarian, and that would include the dinosaurs, because dinosaurs by definition, in fact we can go one step further, because dinosaurs by definition walked on the land.
Yes.
Right? Even though we have the swimming dinosaurs and the flying dinosaurs, they're technically not dinosaurs, they're flying or swimming, reptiles, marine or flying. They're sauruses, yes. But the true dinosaurs walked on the land, so you can even go one step further and say, we know what day they were created. And the Bible tells us they were created on day 6, because they are land creatures, and all land creatures created on day 6 of creation.
Yes, that's right. The beasts of the earth and the beasts of the field and the creeping things.
All day 6. And of course your flying sauruses and your swimming sauruses day 5.
That's right.
Well, speaking of our flying and swimming sauruses, let's have a look at an example of both of them. First of all, we'll deal with the swimming sauruses first. In fact, Diane, we've got this rather wonderful display case with a rather fantastic looking fossil inside. Well, I know where this is from. This is from Morocco, and it's from a place near what's known as the Kemkem in Morocco. It's not quite the Kemkem, because the Kemkem has its very famous kind of red sandstones and red limestones, which has got these, is where you get all the dinosaurs like the Spinosaurus and stuff out of. But let's just have a look at this. I mean, again, Diane, you've got some pretty serious teeth. This is a real fossil, by the way, and you can see up the top here, we've got the eye socket, we've got most of the teeth in place, but the other side, it's actually squashed, because we're looking at the top of a skull. So you've got the eye socket up here, you've got the left and the right jaw, but they've actually been squashed to the point that they've actually kind of pushed out over on top of themselves. And also we've got the back of the head here and the start of the vertebrae just up here. So Diane, what kind of creature are we looking at here?
This is a mosasaur, which was like a huge crocodile sort of creature.
One of the big sauruses for sure, but one of the big marine swimming saurus, big swimming creature, almost often referred to as dinosaurs, aren't they? Swimming dinosaurs, in sort of layman's terms, perhaps. But a pretty spectacular creature for sure. But notice a few things about it. Number one, this is buried in a what's known as a phosphate limestone. So it's a kind of a sandy limestone. It's full of shells and marine stuff, and it's back to that same family of calcareous ooze, which we mentioned in one of the earlier episodes. So this is supposed to be a sediment which slowly builds up over long periods of time. Now, if this was true, would we be able to get a huge, great big fossil like Mosasaurus buried in it?
No, because this was such an enormous creature.
I mean, look at it. It's fantastic, isn't it?
I mean, even though it's squashed, it still would take an awful lot of sediment to bury it.
I mean, it needs to be buried, even though it's squashed, and we'll move on to what the squash means in a minute. But the fact that it's there and it's preserved, and the bone is actually in pretty good shape. Now, this is what we call as an as-found fossil, right? It's been cleaned up, it's been scraped off, but there's been no reconstruction done to it. It hasn't been pulled out and built back up into how it looked like when the creature was alive. It's not had bits added to it or glued together. It is the complete creature. So you can tell a lot about how it was buried. And so, number one, it had to be very quickly. Because the fact you've got a fossil here, well, it couldn't have slowly built up. The fact that the sediment is full of tiny little shells, even that tells you it had to be buried quickly. Because what's the key point? We've made this point before, but Diane, what's the key thing when it comes to making a fossil? Is it time?
No, time is no help whatsoever. In fact, time is a problem with fossils because nothing's going to sit on the ground and just wait to be fossilized, because it will disintegrate, other animals will come along and scavenge it. If you want something to be fossilized, it has to be buried quickly and deeply.
And so no oxygen, no
oxygen,
time for worms and things to come down.
Right.
It's got to be buried very quickly. So number one, it can't be a slow calcareous ooze that's kind of, slowly building its way up over vast periods of time. This has got to be a very quick burial for sure.
Yes.
All right, now let's talk about the squashing. I mean, what can the squashing indicate?
Well, it indicates that something very large and heavy has fallen on it.
Yeah.
And as it has to be buried quickly, I think a massive sediment would be...
It would do the trick, wouldn't it? Yeah.
the...
See, if you go by the standard story, which is these creatures lived, died, fell to the bottom, slowly sunk down, slowly got built up, you wouldn't get a creature like this, certainly not one that's been squashed by force. You can really see how those crushing waters have collapsed it and forced it into place. So it's great to see, even though it might not look the most, spectacular in terms of it's not a completely reconstructed skull. You'll find that this is how most of these creatures are found. They're found squashed. They're found crushed. It's evidence of being drowned, because even though these were marine creatures, as far as we know, these breathe air.
They're still, like crocodiles.
Yeah, exactly.
They live in the water, but they breathe air.
They breathe air. So you can still easily drown, a bit more easier than, even fish can drown, but slightly easier than fish. These creatures could drown, and they were drowned and squashed and buried very, very quickly. So apart from the fact that it's a really cool skull, it's a great dinosaur, well, we call it a dinosaur skull, it's a great saurus skull with great big teeth, and it looks spectacular. It's also excellent evidence that it got buried really quickly in a global flood.
That's right.
For
in
sure.
a big flood. Yes.
Absolutely.
This is a catastrophic episode.
Exactly. It's a dump. It's a fossil dump. And if we move along a little bit, we've got another skull fossil just in the same cabinet of a Haliosaurus, which is a smaller type of mosasaurus. And this has had minor reconstruction done. So with many of these things, this is how it comes. But oftentimes you'll find lots of random bones, so they'll pull out the bits of bones and just kind of glue it back together and make a reconstructed composite thing. Well, this isn't quite that. It's all of the original bone in the original rock. The only difference is some of the bits has been lifted up and glued back together. But you can clearly see, Diane, look, if you go and show us there, you can clearly see the different little bits of glue and see the distinction. So it's kind of a nice compromise. It's kind of half and half, right? A little bit of gluing and bringing it back and kind of lifting it up, but it gives you a nice perspective of what this creature looked like. So you've got this nice head with all the teeth, bit of the backbone, fairly long neck on the Haliosaurus, unlike the short neck on the true Mosasaurus, and then a whole body. So it's a bit more sort of plesiosaur-like, but I mean, just you can see all the little tiny shells that are still inside of it. You can see all of the detail, all of the bone structure. It's really beautiful. And again, the same evidence of being squashed, so it is indeed a flood deposit. So we have these here, Diane, because we want people to come in and be in awe of these things straight away. And, you know, what are we trying to do with the museum? What are we trying to prove with these kinds of things? What's the point of showing evidence for a global flood?
Well, we want to show people that God is the God of the real world. And we are told about a global flood. Well, if that really happened, there should be evidence.
Absolutely.
Well, here's the evidence. Huge big fossils squashed in masses of sediment.
And so that also indicates that if God really did send a global flood, that was his judgment on mankind.
Right.
So not only did he judge, he also has the right to judge, and he's promised he's going to judge again.
Indeed, because he is the creator of the world in the first place. He judged the world when human beings rebelled against their creator, and he is coming back as the final judge.
But in the first judgment, in the judgment of Noah's flood, did everybody perish?
No, some people survived. Some people found grace, and it talks about one particular man who found grace, which is God's favour. And so that's a lesson that we can learn, because we can also have God's favour.
Yeah, so we all deserve judgment, and if God doesn't pour out his judgment on us, that's mercy, but if he gives us more than we deserve, that's grace. So not only can we find escape from the oncoming judgment, just like Noah found escape from the oncoming judgment, and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives, they found escape from the judgment in the form of an ark. Not only do we find escape from oncoming judgment in Jesus, but we go one step further, we gain eternal life with him. So we get grace and mercy. So praise the Lord for that. And that's why we're here. We're not just here to prove a global flood. We're not just here to prove creation. We're here to tell people about who the creator and the judge was and is. It's Jesus Christ. So let's move on from here, Diane. We've got a great job. We're going to come around here because, in fact, later on we're going to do an entire episode on tites and mites, the stalactites and stalagmites. But I just wanted to show you this pretty spectacular stalactite here. It's all the way from China. We had it donated to us, which was fabulous. I mean, just look at this. It's enormous, huge, great big thing, isn't it?
It is. It's huge.
And it weighs a ton. It was a nightmare getting it here and trying to get it from one building to the other. But what amazes me is this thing hung down from the ceiling. And when I first saw it, I had visions of being able to suspend it back how it was in the cave. I don't think we'll be doing that anytime soon.
The roof might fall in.
It might not, yeah. So we're probably going to keep it this way up, looking a bit sort of stalagmite, but it is actually a stalactite. But it's pretty great looking. It's really solid. You can see all the layers and the rings, and of course we've got some stalactite machines and research which we'll deal with later in our entire episode. But I just wanted to show you this because I think it just shows you that we really do have some world-class things in our museum collection. So that's brilliant. Anyway, we've got 3 other fossils to show you, big fossils, and we've literally just today, haven't we, Diane, ended up doing it. So follow us over here because it does look pretty spectacular. Let's start with this one. Now, we've just spoken about the dinosaurs, or the sauruses, and we've just spoken about the marine sauruses, the marine dinosaurs. These are one of the flying dinosaurs, right?
That's right.
Or the, flying sauruses anyway. This is a big slab of what's known as Purbeck limestone. So, Diane, on the south coast, as I'm sure you know, there's a place called the Isle of Purbeck, which is more of a peninsula now, but it was an isle at one point. And you've got this wonderful kind of rock there, which is often used in stonemasonry, right? So flat wall stones or paving slabs and stuff like this. And this was actually donated to us by a quarryman, a stonemason, who collected it and was associated with a local church, and so they ended up passing it on to us. And it's pretty spectacular. So if you look up close, Diane, you can see there's full of little shells and stuff in here, and lots of other little fossil-y, shelly sort of things, possibly a little bit of coprolite. But you can see how we've side lit it from the top, right? And you can see, well, when this was first discovered, they thought it was some kind of a footprint, like a human footprint, right? And it does look a bit like that. You've got one there, and you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 toes, and you've got another part of a one there. We spotted 1 or 2 others around here as well. Well, I had to go off and do a bit of research because I'd never seen anything like this before, and it turns out it's not only exceptionally rare, in fact, as far as we can find, there's only 2 other examples of these footprints from this deposit, but we were even able to work out exactly what it was. It's a pterosaur, or a pterodactyl footprint. So tell us what the pterodactyls were, or the pterosaurs.
Well, pterosaurs were huge flying reptiles.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have flying reptiles these days, but in the past, when the dinosaurs were alive, there were also flying reptiles. Now, people think of them as flying dinosaurs.
Yeah.
They weren't dinosaurs.
They're often
but
referred to as fly, aren't they?
So they're properly called pterosaurs, which means winged sauruses. And some of them had an enormous wingspan.
Yeah, I think the largest one, the Quetzalcoatlus, was like a sort of a plane-sized kind of creature. Yeah, it
right.
really is enormous.
Really huge.
So we're looking at a footprint, right? So at some point it's brought the creature down into the soft mud, probably because of storms or whatever, and they've left their footprints, a proper trackway as it's walking across. Now, as I say, there's only two others that we know of. One is in the Natural History Museum, one is in the Dorchester Museum. This is the third and the best example, I might add. So we're really blessed to have this. It's thank you very much to the guy who donated it. It's absolutely beautiful and wonderful, and it's a great example of again that flood water laying down the sediment, but then also bringing the creatures down and preserving them, trying to escape as they walk through. So it's nice to have a good example of the pterodactyloids as well.
That's right. So, another example of something that has to be formed rapidly.
Exactly.
After all, how long does a footprint last in mud?
Well, let's let's very briefly just talk about climate change. And you might think, well, what's the connection between this and climate change? Well, there's a bit of a problem with these flying reptiles, these rhamphorhynchoids and these pterodactyloids, which is, it would appear, based on what we know about them and their dynamics and the aerodynamics, that the atmosphere today just simply wouldn't be able to sustain their flight, because they're big creatures, huge creatures, some of them in fact. So does that give us an indication that perhaps the climate was different, or perhaps the atmosphere was different before the flood?
Yes, something must have been different in the atmosphere before Noah's flood, because scientists actually have tried to work out computer models. We have enough of their bones and their joints to work out sort of what the configuration of their wing was. As well as just how large they were in general. And aerodynamically, they won't fly in today's atmosphere. So something had to be different, because they definitely existed.
Yeah, absolutely. So the atmosphere was likely to be a lot denser to help sustain them.
It would fit if the atmosphere was denser,
and so indications that might be higher oxygen, higher carbon dioxide levels, or concentrations, probably both. And that would make not only a atmosphere that these creatures could fly in, but it would make a healthier atmosphere for plants and stuff as well.
It would be a better atmosphere for everything.
Everything, including us. So there you go. It really does give you a little bit of an insight into the kind of, life before Noah's flood, and also perhaps a very good reason as to why these things don't exist anymore today, because they couldn't fly today. So there are no wonders that they went extinct. But being flying creatures, would they have gone onto Noah's Ark?
Yes, they would have. All the air-breathing, land-dwelling animals. Now, flying creatures basically live on land.
They're not submarine.
They don't live in the air in the same way that a fish lives in the sea, right? The birds live in trees on the ground. They build nests.
They have flight and come down.
So
they're still regarded as the birds.
All the air-breathing, land-dwelling creatures and the birds. And so all the flying creatures would be classified as birds.
So by the Hebrew definition.
Definitely on the
ark. So they went on the ark, they would have come off the ark, they're obviously extinct today, but don't be surprised, because the atmosphere was different before the flood, therefore could have sustained them. And after the flood, probably weren't able to survive quite as well, if at all. So,
yes, sadly, a lot of things are no longer with us that would have been in Noah's Ark.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on, because it's not just this one. We've got two more giant fossils down here. So what are we looking at down here then, Diane? What's this here?
Here we have a beautiful slab of crinoids. Now, these are called sea lilies, but they're not actually plants. They're actually animals, like starfish, like echinoderms in general, which are the starfish family, like sea urchins. And we have most beautiful preservation here, and that's significant in itself. Look at all the fine detail here.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yes.
So quite a lot to gather from here. Number one, these are from rocks which are known as Ordovician, and we've mentioned before in the programme that Ordovician is named after the Ordovici tribe, so nothing to do with millions of years, but despite that, these are regarded to be about 450 million years old, right? Now, you said that these were crinoids, or also known as sea lilies. So why do we call them sea lilies?
Well, even though they're animals, they are actually anchored to the sea floor, and that's what these stems are. So when you see them, they do actually look like a plant that's growing out of the ground with a flower-like head.
So we know these from the fossils, but how do you know that they lived like that on the sea floor?
Well, they're still alive.
Ah, well, there we go. So these are true living fossils.
These are true living fossils.
So
yes.
remember, even though these are claimed to be 450 odd million years old, all you've proven is that in 450 million years, sea lilies have turned into
sea lilies.
Sea lilies.
Yes,
they haven't changed at all.
yes.
They're identical. So evidence of living fossils, no evidence of evolution here at all?
No evolution. In fact, this is a classic example of things multiplying after their kind. And that's what we're told in Genesis. In fact, we're told 10 times. Every time God made some sort of new living creature, he said it was according to its kind or after its kind, depending on which Bible translation you mean. But that means it's to reproduce the same kind. So it's not going to change into anything else. That's how God built in the living creatures.
So crinoids will always produce crinoids, and all living things will always only produce it. So there is no evolution at all. There might be some minor change, but that's also the wrong kind of change for evolution. It's a downhill change.
There's downhill change and there's variation, but there's definitely no uphill change, and there's no change from one kind into another.
So go and watch our entire episode on living fossils that we did.
Yes.
That if you want to find out more about that. But let's talk about another aspect of this, Diane, because you mentioned that there's something significant in the level of preservation. Now, if we have these as living fossils, presumably we can go and study the real things. And are they... I mean, they look pretty tough and hard at the moment, like they'll all hold together, but when you go and see them in the real world, are they really tough and hard? Would they be buried really easily?
No, they're not tough and hard at all. They're very soft, and calling them sea lilies in a way reminds you,
they're petals.
Rather, that's right, they're fairly fragile within the living world. So in order to get this level of preservation, they had to be buried really rapidly before anything could fall to pieces or anything else could come along and damage them.
So it has to be a really fine sediment, so it doesn't destroy them. It's not like putting them through a sand blitzer.
Yes.
It's got to be the right kind of sediment. It's got to be buried very quickly. They can't be tumbling around for ages. No. You can see indications of flowing water because you can actually see almost a path that they're pointing in this way. So it's definitely flowing water. And of course, we know that it has to be flowing water to carry the sediment, because you don't have sediment suspended and slowly settling down. You've got to get the sediment there in the first place, which can only be done by flowing water. So you've definitely got evidence of water that's flown into position. It's buried them very, very quickly, very deeply, no chance to decay or rot or fall down. It's beautiful preservation and really spectacular fossil, really.
It's brilliant. Yes, it is.
Now, these Ordovician layers go all over the world, I know, because I've dug in them all over the world, right? So we're looking at evidence of a flooding event that has washed these into place. It's buried them extremely quickly. It's buried them without hardly any decay, and it's a rock formation that goes around the world. So what are we looking at evidence of here, Diane?
So here we're looking at more evidence of a worldwide flood.
A worldwide global flood that buried things and killed things very, very quickly. Well, we have one more fossil, Diane. Why don't you take the camera over there and show us about these things, because these are spectacular. These are known as Devonian, so maybe you can have a guess, Diane. What do you think Devonian is named after?
Well, I think I've been to a place called Devon in England.
Absolutely, yes.
Devonian.
It's worth remembering that these names have nothing to do with millions of years or evolution. They have everything to do with where they were first studied, where they were first seen, and really where they were first found. And it's a rock name rather than a time period. It's a name of a rock. So Devonian, the rocks like the ones in Devon, or the rocks that were first studied in Devon. It's really as simple as that. So these are a type of cephalopod. We call them a shelled cephalopod. They're sort of grouped together in a group called orthoceras. Even though orthoceras is a specific genus, these are generally regarded regard as the orthocerids or the nautiloids. So cephalopod, what's a cephalopod, Diane?
A cephalopod, well, there are living cephalopods these days. They're like squids.
Ah, right, so the tentacly things.
Yes, that's right. So soft, squishy things with tentacles that live in the sea.
Yeah. Now these, I said, these are shelled cephalopods. Now we have one type of shelled cephalopod still living today. In fact, we spoke about him in the living fossil section. What's he called?
Yes, that's the nautilus. But unlike these, the nautilus is curled up.
So these are a bit like the curly-whirly nautiluses or ammonites, but these are a straight shell. You can see a beautiful, great big straight shell here. And what's interesting is you can see here, look, we've got all these little chambers. And what they think is that these chambers, similar to an ammonite or nautilus, were used to hold a gas. So a bit like a submarine, the more gas there is, up it he floats, the less gas down he sinks. So pretty spectacular design there. And then there's a little chamber down the bottom here, which is where the creature lives and sticks his tentacles out, and off he goes. So these are Devonian, also from Morocco, similar to the crinoids one, same kind of area. These are from the Atlas Mountains, and it's in a hard limestone, and it's a hard limestone as sort of beginning the metamorphosis process, which means you can polish it up. So this would have come in a great big slab. You sort of carve and cut down in between each one, polish them up so you can see all the internal structure in the chambers, and absolutely beautiful. But Diane, there's something significant, something that I've noticed, and I know you know, about how these are all aligned together, because you have a similar phenomena happening over in Jurassic Ark, but not with orthoceras, with wood. So what's going on here?
Well, this is indication that things are flowing. When you've got long, elongated structures, whether they're pieces of wood, whether they're elongated shells, if they're in flowing water, they're going to line themselves up according to the direction of the flow. So there is a very distinct direction in all of these,
in the way that they're
beautifully
pointing.
lined up.
Now, this is an enormous deposit. I mean, it's the same kind of deposit that you find in the Grand Canyon. They're perhaps the most famous of the nautiloids, orthoceras type creatures. But personally, I mean, the Grand Canyon probably gets the most rep because it's the Grand Canyon. But to me, these are a much larger deposit. They are massively more abundant. They're much more accessible as well than going and getting stuff from the Grand Canyon. But to me, these just show just as good, if not better, evidence of this massive flooding event which is washing all these creatures into place. And you get ammonites and gonatites and all sorts of stuff in here as well. So absolutely fantastic piece of evidence of it being washed into place. In fact, I remember first year geology, it was one of the things that they taught me, was that you can recognise flowing water, or they called it evidence for transportation. So the idea that creatures lived and died and got buried where they were, that would be sort of as life. Whereas these show evidence of transportation. They didn't live there, die there and get buried there. They lived, but something has killed them, the flowing water has killed them and buried them and swept them into position. So they've been transported. And so you're definitely looking at evidence of transportation. You're definitely looking at evidence of a flooding event. And you're definitely looking at evidence of a very large base flooding event. It's the same rocks in Morocco. You find the same rocks in, well, Devon, as well as in the Grand Canyon. So really a massive flooding event, absolutely beautiful. And also these nautiloids, we find them all over the world, and even though they appear to be extinct today, do we see evidence of after their kind from these creatures?
Yes, we do, because wherever we find them in the fossil record, they have exactly this same structure. You never see any signs that they once were something else, or they're evolving into anything else. They are very clearly and very easily identifiable as orthoceras or orthoceroids. So again, after their kind, even in the fossil record.
So they evolved from nothing, they evolved into nothing until they went extinct. So no evolution whatsoever.
No evolution, and they've not got any chance of doing it.
So not only are we looking at evidence of God's creation in both of these fossils, in fact in all of these fossils, but we're particularly looking at wonderful evidence of a large flooding event, and also that key thing which is process, not time. It's process that produces this. It's the right process as well, and it's the process which is really the key to actually bring this all together and getting it buried and forming it in these massive limestone deposits. So there we are, another excellent piece of evidence there, Diane. In fact, we've looked around at some of our much larger exhibits and displays as well. So I'm really enjoying this. We've had a look around. We've got a whole team of people here still setting up and still working on things and getting everything ready for display. And you've been working, we've got databases and stuff to do. So we better get on, Diane, and film some more stuff now, because we've got so much more evidence to go through. We have no idea. Well, we could keep going on this forever, but we're limited on when you need to go back to Australia.
That's right.
So
lots of wonderful things to see.
we want to carry on and try and get as much of this content out to you. So keep watching, keep tuning in every 2 weeks as we put these out, and we'll see you next time. So Diane, all of this stuff, we've reported on these many times. Remind our viewers how they can find out more about it.
You can go to our main website, creationresearch.net, and that will tell you about some of our experiments, some of our fossil finds, our other museum in Australia, our outdoor museum, Jurassic Ark. And if you start there, that will also take you to our other websites, the website about this museum, about the UK work, and also our archives of fact file and our questions.
Yeah, and all available on our website, and links to the websites here in the UK and for the museum project, and how you can get involved, whether by volunteering, donating, or coming and working with us. So stay tuned, we'll be back.
Indeed we will.
Catch you later.